want to call up our panelists to sit down and have this very timely discussion. Jamira Burley, Human Rights and Impact Strategist. Komal Ahmad, founder of Copia, a technology company focusing on food redistribution and waste management. And Aditi Meyer, sustainable fashion expert, photojournalist, labor and climate advocate. I feel like we're gathered around the campfire, so gather around, ladies. Let's see what we can do here. Now, social responsibility, that's a theme that we often hear, and as people in the private sector, the responsibility lays on the individual a lot of the times. Yes, the government does create some parameters, but the responsibility lays on the individual's shoulders. Now, Jamira, beginning with you. Now, what are the key principles and values that businesses should embrace to be more socially responsible?
Great question. And I'll actually start off and say congratulations to each and every one of you, because you could be anywhere in the world, but I think the fact that you here recognize that you feel a personal responsibility to do something about the very real issues we all are facing as a generation, but also as a collective world. And in regards to that, I think it's really important to note that, corporations are ran by people, right? And at the core of it, we all share collective values. So whether that's, I want to be safe, I want to be able to feed my families, I want to be able to build a society in which people can thrive. And so I think when we think about the responsibility of businesses, particularly their values that they should center around, it should be one of collective action and collective responsibility, meaning it's not just about profit. A few years ago, we used to say that for corporations to do social good, it was the nice thing to do. Well, the data has shown that it's actually beneficial to your bottom line. So it's not only good for the environment and for the culture, it also is better for your bottom line because it enables for young people who feel responsible to be able to purchase and participate in a company that also shares their values about creating a world where we all can thrive.
How informed do you feel the consumer is? Does the consumer know companies that are socially responsible and those that aren't irresponsible companies? Can they decipher the difference when they're spending their dollar? And how much do you think that impacts their choice?
I think to some extent, right? There are worldwide brands that we know are doing amazing social good work around the world. But at the core of it, we also know that companies are extremely large. And oftentimes their social persona does not move collectively throughout the entire organization. So meaning the president, the CEO, and the board could be talking about all of these amazing things, but the reality is they're still purchasing from countries that are practicing child labor. They're still purchasing products and services that are actually bad for the environment. So I do think we know companies that are doing well, but not collectively are all companies doing well. But the consumer knows, and they're asking the right questions.
Thank you, Jamira. Komal, you're the founder of Copia, a tech company dealing with food redistribution and waste management. Now, technology has been advancing. At times that technology is used properly for the good of humanity, good of climate. At times it's used negatively. Now, in your business and in your experience, how has technology changed the approach towards food distribution and waste reduction and the logistics problem of hunger?
Yeah, so we waste 3 times more food, perfectly edible food, than there are mouths to feed. So we call it the world's dumbest problem, not because hunger sucks, but because it is a solvable problem, right? Hunger is not a scarcity problem, it's a logistics problem. So we have more than enough food to feed every person on the planet. Does my voice come out weird here?
No, you sound great.
Okay, great. Thank you. So what we're using is technology to connect high-quality excess food, primarily prepared food from businesses, so hospitals, universities, corporations, stadiums, arenas, to easily allow them to request pickups of their excess food and then match that exact amount and type of food to nearby nonprofits. So after-school programs for underprivileged youth, domestic abuse shelters, senior citizen homes, and easily match that food, have it delivered in on average 26 minutes or less, and have that delivered to nonprofits in need. So it's like a Match.com for sandwiches. So that's one part of the solution. And then for the businesses who are our customers, right, the food donors themselves, we're also using data and analytics to help them understand, well, what is being wasted and why, and giving them the actionable insights they need to reduce overpurchasing and overproduction. So why is this food being wasted? Is it on Mondays? Is it on Fridays? Is it raining outside so employees didn't go to work or fans didn't go to a game? Like, what is driving this excess? And then giving them the actionable insights they need to reduce overpurchasing and overproduction. Knowing that they're never gonna go to zero, right? Go to any Indian wedding, go to a Google cafeteria. There's gonna be plenty of excess. But we want to help them reduce overpurchasing, knowing that there is a solution for any of the excess, inevitable excess that they have. And so we're the first solution that is both helping them reduce waste and end hunger, all through one seamless software solution.
There's been a lot of momentum right now regarding automation and AI. How do you see that working into technology and being able to enhance better utilizing food redistribution and waste management?
I mean, it's only going to help. It's only going to improve the whole process. I mean, whether it's drone technology that's going to help move food faster. I mean, whether it's also smarter technology from the time of sourcing. I mean, there's so much that happens, and we're not going to be the only solution for improving this process. We're not going to be the only solution to solve hunger. I'm not naive, nor do I have this hubris in this. So there's a lot of, whether it's cold chain technology solutions, there's a lot of solutions that need to come in to help disrupt the food waste problem. 40% of the food that we produce is left on the fields, and this is a global issue.
I'm very happy you actually said drones, because Turkey, a very big drone producer, and during the February 6th twin earthquakes, that they actually found very innovative ways to use drones to be able to help many of the earthquake survivors. Now, Aditi, I want to move over to you. Now, what are some effective strategies for businesses to integrate sustainability into their practices, considering the importance of social and environmental justice?
Yeah, I want to build on what you said, Jamira, about the way that a lot of businesses have kind of embodied business models that are inherently unsustainable. So my origin story in the sustainable fashion world has been 10 years in the making. I had my start 10 years ago after learning about a factory collapse in Bangladesh called the Rana Plaza factory collapse. And essentially what happened with the Rana Plaza factory collapse is structural cracks were found in this 8-story garment factory, and it was ordered to evacuate. But there was so much pressure from upper management to have workers complete orders that they were called back into work the next day. And the factory collapsed and framed the biggest industrial disaster of our time. So for me at that time, I started thinking critically about how the dominant fashion model, which is largely fast fashion today, has normalized so many business practices, social and environmental, that are extremely unsustainable. So to your question about strategies that can address these things, when I think about Rana Plaza and the larger fast fashion model, what we see is scale and speed have set the conditions for an industry where human lives are, cut as a cost. And so one of the big things that I've noticed in the climate action movement is reflections on degrowth. And degrowth doesn't have to be the end of business as we know it. It underpins, yes, consuming less and therefore producing less, but also take-back programs or circular business models that challenge a very linear system we have right now, where we produce something, we consume something, and then we dispose of it. Right now, 92 million tons of fashion every year go into the landfill, and we make about 100 million clothes or tons a year. So think about that in percentage-wise. So there's a huge opportunity about challenging disposability culture. And it's a deeper-rooted conversation of shifting culture, right? And it's going to require businesses to revisit how they produce, and also consumers to revisit how we consume.
Exactly. I think a lot of responsibility rests on the consumer as well, because you have this ready-to-wear culture, something's a trend today, tomorrow you throw it away, give it away. And inside of this understanding, how are the consumer and the producer going to reach a happy medium where this is sustainable?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it's interesting because we have a culture where we put most of the onus on the individual consumer. And although there is a responsibility that we each have to revisit our consumption habits, I think the larger conversation and onus needs to actually be on the industry. But I think what we saw in light of Rana Plaza was a complete change in the culture around fashion. And on social media, we saw people beginning to ask companies, who made my clothes? This became a viral hashtag that anyone can check on social media right now. You'll see millions and millions of posts of consumers demanding transparency from brands. And so I think it marks a shift where transparency is step one because there's so much opacity in how businesses actually operate, especially in fashion. So we see a movement of brands looking to actually identify how their supply chains operate as step one in, really tracing things back to the raw material level and all the hands that touch it. And I think that's a really important step towards sustainability.
Definitely. And speaking of hashtags, hashtag what's next and hashtag next by TRT World Forum when you're liking, sharing, tweeting, posting. Please don't forget to use the hashtags. Thank you for that. Jamira, now, in your experience, you've worked with a lot of diverse teams worldwide. What strategies or approaches have you found effective in helping businesses address social and environmental challenges that create a positive impact?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And, when I started my activism, it was very much rooted in the fact that I was directly impacted by having my brother Andre, who was shot and killed in Philadelphia. And what I learned in that work is that at 15, trying to understand the issues impacting people in my community, is that there are very frontward-facing issues like gun violence, criminal justice, poverty, and they are public faces to deeper societal problems. So when I'm working with diverse teams, it's really about understanding the intersectionality of people's lived experiences and the cultural competence that is required for us to not just hear someone's story, but understand the intersectionalities of how their story aligns with mine. We always talk about the story of ourselves, but we also need to think about the story of us. So how does the story of me intertwine with the story of us, and how do we use those stories to better create policies, practices, and cultural norms that will make all of us safe? So I think when you're working with diverse teams, it's important to not tokenize anyone's lived experience. It's important to not feel like you can automatically make comparisons, especially when there's that border difference. And then also allow for people to build genuine relationships and be very intentional with how you bring folks together, which is extremely hard now when we're doing the work from home, right? The collaboration from home. But I do think as long as we come to the table with an understanding that we're never gonna know every single answer, and how do we open ourselves up to being wrong and to hearing and viewing our experience through the lens of someone else's unique experience.
When you're working in different geographies, do you ever face some type of cultural, financial, social bottlenecks that make your job harder? And how do you overcome these? Especially if you can give an example, that would be great.
Yeah, it's so funny. When you were giving your examples, it made me think about, it's very easy for us to think that these solutions are not solved because of lack of resources. These issues oftentimes are not solved because someone is making money on violence. Someone is making money on poverty. Someone is making money on the barriers that prevent all of us from living our lives. And so when I try to engage funders on these issues, is to help them understand that there are both the cultural benefits of making sure that people have the resources and tools that they need to survive, but also by doing so, we create jobs. By doing so, we create consumers who can fully participate in society. So I think it's just changing the language depending on the audience that enables for resources to become more available for those communities.
Kamal, I want you to share some of the practical insights of how businesses can effectively redistribute excess food, but also reduce waste management while doing it. How does that have a synergistic or a reciprocal effect on each other?
Can you elaborate what you mean by that?
Well, okay. For example, when businesses are effectively redistributing excess food to those in need, how does that impact? What's the correlation between redistributing food and waste management?
Okay. Well, they're helping the community, right? And so we're also, so instead of throwing it away, or composting it, they're also like feeding their community in need. And so we're also helping them. We provide them impact reports that identify like how many people did they feed, where did this food go, who in their community did this feed, what was their methane offset. We think that it's really important that they engage their employees as well in this process, so that they know also that their food, like Cisco's food, is too good to be wasted, right? And it went to go feed people and not landfills, and that also giving them, their employees, better practices on how do they reduce overproduction, right? And that it's not their fault. How do we make sure that we're not punishing their chefs? Because a lot of the time, chefs don't want to admit that there's like food waste. You know what? When we're onboarding or trying to onboard new customers, a lot of the time, people don't admit that they have like food waste. They don't want to admit it because it's like a shameful thing. And so that's one of the barrier to entry, is because no one wants to admit that they have excess food. When we know it's just part of business. People, like, events always have like a 20%, because God forbid we don't have, like, go to any wedding. You don't want to run out of food at any event. And so, but there's always like a buffer that's built in. And so how do we make sure that we make it a safe environment? And so we want to make sure that we are helping like the chef, the culinary staff be comfortable with the fact that excess happens. And so food waste management is a very new concept. And so that's one part of it. What was your other question?
Well, I actually want to ask you something else now. You said it's a very new concept, and when we look at the state of food waste management today versus 5 years ago and 5 years from now, how do you see the 5-year incremental advance, and what do you expect in the next 5 years?
Well, I think policy is really big on this. So in California now, policy meaning there is both the incentive and there's a carrot and there's a stick, right? So as an example, there is a tax incentive that's in place. So it used to be that you could write off in the US, you could write off 10% of your net income for food donations. Now it's 30% with that delta of 20 specifically for food donations. And let's say you're not profitable as a business, you could carry that forward for 5 additional years. So it makes financial sense for you to do the right thing. And we make this whole process seamless for you through our audit-proof tax deduction platform. So there's that one process. Then now we see policy that's taking place, and you see it in Paris, you see it in France, you see it in Italy, you see it in Belgium, where there's full-blown food waste bans. And it's not a slap on the wrist, it's an $80,000 fine, punishable by prison for businesses that don't donate their food. Do I think that's going to happen in the US? Not necessarily, but we do see in California like a law that's passed called SB 1383, which is mandating that businesses donate their food or repurpose their food to organizations like ours, and also provide data back to the jurisdiction, which is Cal Recycle, about like how they're reducing 20% of their currently disposed of edible food, and the same thing, providing data and analytics, and also repurposing their excess food. So like this legislation is also coming in place. So you see the carrot, which is like the financial incentives, and the stick, which is now mandates that food be redistributed.
One word answer: what's more effective in policy, carrot or stick?
Stick.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Aditi, now your work emphasizes the importance of sustainable fashion and the need for systematic change in the industry. How do you envision fashion embracing biodiversity and indigenous approaches to agriculture to create a more sustainable future?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So right now, we have a business model in fashion, or the dominant business model is one in which power is very much centralized to a select few fast fashion brands. And in this model, you have, CEOs who are among the richest billionaires in the world, and we have a situation where garment workers are making sense to the day. And so when I'm asked about my ideal future of fashion and what that looks like, I often say it's decentralized. And I often get the question, well, what does fashion have to do with environmental justice or social justice? So when I'm talking about fashion that is decentralized, I think there's a lot that we can actually learn from artisanal clusters and groups across the world, across cultures, that have had business models with fashion that really honor local ecologies. So I'm from India. And a lot of the British Empire in India was tied to fashion. It was an empire of textiles and cotton. And so a lot of my work is around this idea of decolonizing fashion. And what we saw during the British Empire's presence in India is farmers who are doing subsistence farming, so farming different crops that would feed the community that were native to that region, were stripped of that and forced to plant a certain variety of cotton. So this diminished the food supply greatly, and it also wreaked havoc on a lot of artisan industries because you had a really intimate relationship between agriculture, producing certain things like a type of linen, a type of cotton, that would then go to artisans. So when I'm talking about decentralized fashion models, it's about going beyond this idea of monocultures, where we have one type of cotton growing across the world, and really honoring the local ecologies of a certain region and allowing that to actually revitalize a lot of artisan industries. I spent the last year in India actually looking at a group of farmers that are at the forefront of challenging the destruction of their land because they were forced to do paddy farming, a type of rice, in a region where that is not native to that landscape. So it meant a lot of pesticide inputs. It means that their groundwater table is falling every year because it requires so much. And they're saying we're historically a cotton belt, and we have cotton that has been rain-fed. So can we return to a certain way of life, a certain culture that underpins this lifestyle? And fashion can actually be the vehicle for symbiotic relationships between land, people, and culture, if we really honor this decentralized model that we've historically had across the world.
We've seen quite a kick in localization lately in many sectors, and many countries are embracing this, trying to find local solutions to local problems. Now, in your experience, what type of dialogue do you see between the producer and the producer, meaning the fashion producer, and the producer of the raw materials, whether it be the cotton, the linen, or any type of thread or cloth? What type of dialogue is there to express the need, saying, hey, I need this actually, if you can produce this locally, it would be more cost effective for me, and also I'd be supporting local industry or local growers as well. Is there this type of dialogue where we're seeing synergy and relay of need versus demand?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think with COVID-19 specifically, we saw the failure of global supply chains, and it really showcased the importance of localizing supply chains. And it's something that we've seen grow in importance for something like food, right? Whether it's the idea of the farmer market and recognizing that environmental and health sustainability is better when you localize a system. But that idea really hasn't permeated fashion yet, but we see that changing. So I think that's definitely evolving. I think another element within that is consumer demand within brands. So when we talk about this movement of hashtag who made my clothes, it's actually grown to other sectors of what is the fabric, where did this fabric come from, and what is the impact of the raw materials on a community. So I think it goes to show the way that a certain vehicle like fashion can really be the tipping point to ask so many other questions related to climate action at large.
Also, a one-word answer for you too. When the consumer looks at the tag and sees a made in their country, or the products are made in their country, how much do you think it impacts their choice when buying low, medium, high?
When they see the country it's made out of.
When they see the country, especially if it's their country, it's a local product.
Like made
Is
in
that-
Pakistan, made in China.
Is that a positive, negative?
I think there is an awareness right now of where sweatshops have hotspots. You know, when I see made in Bangladesh, I'm gonna not be like, South Asian pride. It's gonna be like, no, we have to challenge a system that has normalized a ready-made garment industry that is propped up upon sweatshops. So low, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Jamira, now, based on your experience working with corporations, nonprofits, government leaders, what are some effective strategies for businesses to authentically engage with and empower marginalized communities?
Putting people at the center of change. Which is not as easy as it sounds. But it requires for companies to not just say that an issue or a community is important, is actually going into the community saying, you are the expert of your lived experience. What is happening? How can we show up in a way that's beneficial to your community versus an organization or a company saying, we have all the solutions. You might have all the resources, you might have all the money, but the solutions lie with those who are the most impacted. There's a slogan we say in our work saying that those who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And so I'm a firm believer that collective impact means that if a company wants to be involved in creating social solutions, impacted communities have to be at the center of change. Governments have to be at the table. Impacted organizations have to be at the table in order for us to create solutions that are holistic and that has everyone's buy-in, because it's not just going to be about putting more money into communities. It also means that there's policies that protect those communities for the long term. And it also means that those communities can then turn around and say, this is either working, it's not working, let's fix it here. But it requires collective impact, and it requires for a coming together of unlikely suspects to be co-conspirators.
Yeah.
Unlikely suspects meaning?
Meaning people that normally wouldn't engage, right? We know the wealthy oftentimes only engage with each other. We know that poor have been excluded from positions and rooms of power. And so it means that we have to broaden the table to include more people who oftentimes who have been what we would say have been disenfranchised and deliberately left out of the conversation, but they are the subject of the conversation, but they're rarely the people leading the work.
It can't be just top down.
Exactly. Top down, bottom up.
Yeah.
Over the past 5 years, is this situation getting better or worse?
You know, after the death of George Floyd, I would have said it gotten better. But we're now seeing over the last 12 months, it's almost companies walking back many of the promises they've made over the last 5 years. And so it's making many of us in the community very nervous.
The police report,
Exactly.
like the police department that just came out.
Yeah, so, and I say that's in regards to, for instance, in Chicago, the United States is in the process of building what we call a cop city. And we're finding out that many of the companies that are backing that, financially backing that, are many of the companies who made millions of dollar commitments to communities of color. And so I think when you don't have people who are directly engaged, who are directly impacted at the center of change, you start to create solutions that actually put those communities in danger. So it's not enough for companies to say they care. It requires them to give up power to those who don't have it in order for them to create the solutions that they need.
Very quickly, what's triggering that walk back you're talking about?
I think what's triggering that walk back is the fact that we are in a very divisive time where companies are unsure on how to show up, and for them, making money might be more important than saving lives.
Okay. Kamal, now Copia has been recognized as one of the top startups run by women in the US. What unique challenges have you faced as a female entrepreneur in the technology and social impact fields, and how have you overcome them to achieve success?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we first started off, how do you take leftover food and give it to poor people and make money from that? Create a sustainable business model from that. I mean, if I had thought about that, I don't think I would have gotten started. Right? When I first started out, it was just about how do I solve this problem? You know, what got me interested in it? I mean, I wasn't even supposed to be here. Like, I was going to be a doctor in the U.S. Navy. That was my plan.
Your plan or your parents' plan?
I mean, both. I was like a brown, you know, there's going to be a doctor, lawyer, engineer, or a complete failure. That was, well, I always wanted to be a Bollywood actress.
I was supposed to be a doctor too. Right now, I'm a complete failure.
Yeah,
so let's continue.
Same, but different. So, and, you know, I was walking down Telegraph Avenue one day and I encountered a homeless man who was begging for food, and you know, something about him compelled me to stop, and I invited him to join me for lunch. And during lunch, he sat across from me, just like you are, scarfing down his food. And, you know, in between bites, he shared a story. He said, my name is John. I just came back from my second tour in Iraq. I've been waiting weeks for my military benefits to kick in, and because they haven't, you know, I haven't eaten in 3 days. And this really hit home for me, because I was like, you know, he had just come home from the battlefield of Iraq, only to face yet another battle, that of hunger. And then adding insult to injury, right across the street, Berkeley's dining hall is throwing away thousands of pounds of perfectly edible food. And so it was this very stark reality of those who have and waste and those who are in need and starve. And those two people right across the street from one another. And what I realized that this is emblematic of a much larger problem, and that's that we waste over 365 million pounds of perfectly edible food every single day. And so, starting off, one of the first issues was the fear of liability, right? So when I marched up to our dining hall managers and I asked them, what do you do with your excess food? They said, well, we try not to have any. And I said, well, how often does that work out for you? And after a lot of pushing and prodding, they finally admitted that they do have excess food, but they have to throw it away. And I said, well, why would you throw it away when you could go right across the street to people in People's Park and donate it? And they said, because of liability, we don't do that. And I was like, yeah, homeless people's high-powered attorneys are just standing by to sue you. Like, John the veteran can't afford a hamburger, but somehow he can afford a litigator. And more than that, you were going to sell this food to us 10 minutes ago at full price. And so 10 minutes ago, it was good enough for Berkeley students, and now 10 minutes later, it's not good enough to feed people who are in need? Like, where's the logic? So anyways, I did my own research, and I discovered that in 1996, Congress passed what is called the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act, and it protects all donors, regardless of whether you're a corporation, organization, or individual, from any liability. And in the last 26 years, no business or individual has been sued. So that was one thing. So it's liability protection. What I realized, it's so much easier to say no because yes requires action. So that's one. And then the other thing is, like, women, when they're raising fundraising, less than 2% of all funds. There's 38% of businesses are run by female founders, but less than 2% of all VC funds are allocated to women, and less than 0.2% are allocated to women that look like us. And that's also, like, the questions that were asked by venture capitalists are primarily prevention questions versus, like, promotion questions. Like, we're asked, instead of saying, it's not like, how big is this opportunity? It's like, why are all the reasons this is going to fail, right? And it's just very different types of questions. And so
we're out of time. I want to give Aditi the last 30 seconds.
Sure.
Key takeaways when everyone's going home. What should they walk away learning? What should be on their mind when they go to bed tonight? What should they ponder?
Yeah, I mean, just to maybe tie in the themes of this really dynamic conversation and connecting it to my world of challenging fast fashion. The goal of fast fashion is alienation. The consumer should be alienated from the source of what they consume, and the product itself is basically disposable. So I would say challenge disposability culture, how we view people, how we view land. That is the true underpinning of sustainability. It's not something you can buy, it's something you embody, and it's a mindset. So let that be your, North Star when you think about business solutions, your role as a consumer, your role as a citizen in larger systems. We have a dominant model that makes so many things disposable. So let's challenge that.
Exactly. Our North Star. Thank you very much, Aditi, Komal, Jamira. That was a fantastic conversation. I really appreciated it. Thank you very much.
thank you.